The sun beat down mercilessly on Pearson Valley, Texas, in the summer of 1875, scorching the earth and everything upon it with an unforgiving intensity that made even the most hardened frontiersman seek shade. Penny O'Malley wiped sweat from her brow with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of dirt across her freckled face as she assessed the threshing machine her father had purchased just 3 months before he passed. The contraption was a marvel of modern engineering, all steel teeth and grinding gears, but it was also a beast that required constant attention and respect. At 23, Penny had inherited not just the O'Malley homestead, but all its burdens. Most women in her position would have sold the land or married in haste, but Penny was cut from different cloth. Her father had raised her to be as tough as any man, teaching her everything from animal husbandry to mechanics, and she wasn't about to surrender her independence because society deemed it proper. She tightened the leather belt that connected to the drive shaft, squinting against the midday glare. The machine had been acting up all morning, the belt slipping when they should have been gripping. Penny couldn't afford to lose a single day of threshing, not with the bank breathing down her neck about the mortgage payments. Just a little more, she muttered to herself, reaching into the inner workings of the machine to adjust a pulley that had come loose. Her fingers worked nimbly, feeling for the right spot. She'd done this a dozen times before, but never with the machine running. Usually she'd stop everything, but time was precious today. That was her first mistake. The second was leaning in too far, allowing her long auburn hair to dangle dangerously close to the mechanism. In an instant, a stray lock caught in one of the smaller belts. Penny felt the sharp tug and tried to jerk back, but it was too late. The belt yanked her forward, her arm sliding between 2 larger belts that drove the main threshing drum. Pain shot up her arm as the belts gripped her sleeve, dragging her inexorably toward the metal teeth. She screamed, struggling against the machine's pull, but her feet slipped on the dusty ground. The relentless mechanism continued to draw her in, indifferent to her terror. "Help!" she screamed, though the nearest neighbor was miles away. "Somebody help me!" As if in answer to a prayer, hoofbeats thundered across the yard. Through tear-blurred eyes, Penny saw a figure leap from a horse and sprint toward her. "Hold on!" a deep voice commanded as boots pounded across the packed earth. Tanner Young had been riding the boundaries of his newly acquired ranch when he heard the scream. Now, taking in the scene in an instant, he shouted, "Kill the gear! Take my hand now!" Without hesitation, he lunged for the emergency brake lever on the thresher, yanking it with all his might. The gears groaned in protest, but the machine began to slow. With his other hand, he reached for Penny, gripping her free hand tightly. "I've got you," he assured her, his voice steady despite the urgency of the situation. "Just hold on to me." The thresher shuddered to a halt, and Tanner carefully extricated Penny's trapped arm from between the belts, supporting her as she collapsed against him. Her sleeve was torn, and angry red marks striped her forearm where the belt had burned the skin. "You're all right now," he murmured, helping her to a shaded spot beneath a nearby cottonwood. "That was a close call, miss." "O'Malley," she managed, her voice shaky. "Penny O'Malley." Tanner nodded, his blue eyes assessing her injuries with concern. "I'm Tanner Young. Just moved into the old Wilson place." He pulled a canteen from his saddle and offered it to her. "You need to be more careful with that contraption. Threshers are notorious for taking fingers or worse." Penny took a long drink, then handed the canteen back with a hint of defiance in her green eyes. "I know what I'm doing, Mr. Young. Been running this farm by myself for over a year now." "All by yourself?" Tanner couldn't keep the surprise from his voice. Single women running farms alone were rare in these parts. "All by myself," she confirmed, wincing as she tried to move her injured arm. "And I thank you for your help, but I need to get back to work. That wheat won't thresh itself." Tanner frowned. "Not today it won't. That machine needs repairs after the emergency stop, and you need to tend to that arm." "I don't have time." "Miss O'Malley," he interrupted, his tone firm but kind. "I've seen what those machines can do when they malfunction. You're fortunate to still have your arm. Let me help you get inside and tend to that burn, and then I'll take a look at your thresher." Penny hesitated. Pride warred with practicality in her mind. She didn't know this man, this cowboy who'd appeared out of nowhere just when she needed help most. But his eyes were honest. And he was right about the thresher. If she tried to operate it in its current condition, she risked not just injury, but complete mechanical failure. "All right," she conceded at last. "But just to be clear, Mr. Young, I'm not some damsel in distress who needs rescuing." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Wouldn't dream of suggesting it, Miss O'Malley. Now, shall we get you inside?" As Tanner helped Penny to her feet, neither of them could have known that this chance encounter, a slipped belt at high noon, would change both their lives forever. Inside the modest farmhouse, Penny directed Tanner to the small kitchen where she kept medicinal supplies in a wooden box her father had carved years ago. She sat at the table, cradling her injured arm while Tanner rummaged through the contents. "You've got quite the collection here," he commented, selecting a jar of salve and some clean bandages. "My father believed in being prepared," Penny replied. "He taught me that a farm this isolated needed to be self-sufficient in all things, including doctoring." Tanner nodded as he pulled up a chair beside her. "Smart man." He took her arm gently, examining the belt burns that ran from her wrist to her elbow. "This will sting," he warned before applying the salve. Penny inhaled sharply but didn't pull away. "How do you know about threshers, Mr. Young? You look more like a cattleman to me." "Call me Tanner, please." He worked methodically, his touch surprisingly gentle for such large hands. "And you're right, I am a cattleman now, but I grew up on a wheat farm in Kansas. Spent plenty of time around threshers and other equipment before I decided I preferred horses to harvesters." "So you've seen accidents before?" His expression darkened momentarily. "Yes. My older brother lost 2 fingers to a thresher when I was 14. Changed the course of his life, couldn't handle a plow or complex tasks after that." He finished wrapping her arm and secured the bandage. "That's why I knew to kill the gear immediately. A second longer and you might have lost a lot more than just skin." Penny studied him as he packed away the medical supplies. He was tall, over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and sun-darkened skin that spoke of years working outdoors. His sandy brown hair was a bit too long, curling at the nape of his neck and around his ears, and a few days' stubble shadowed his jaw. But it was his eyes that captured her attention, blue as a summer sky and filled with an intelligence that belied his rough exterior. "Thank you," she said softly. "I mean it." Tanner met her gaze. "You're welcome, Miss O'Malley." "Penny," she corrected him. "If I'm to call you Tanner, then you should call me Penny." He smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his face and sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. "Penny it is, then. Now, if you're feeling up to it, I'd like to take a look at that thresher. The emergency stop might have damaged some components." Outside, the sun had begun its slow descent toward the horizon, but the heat remained oppressive. Tanner removed his vest and rolled up his sleeves as he examined the thresher, quickly identifying several issues that needed attention. "The main drive belt needs replacing," he explained, pointing out where the leather had worn thin. "And this pulley is misaligned. That's probably why the belt slipped in the first place." He glanced at Penny. "Do you have spare parts?" She nodded. "In the barn. My father was thorough about keeping extras on hand." For the next 2 hours, they worked side by side. Penny's arm throbbed, but she refused to be a mere spectator. She handed Tanner tools, held parts in place while he adjusted them, and offered suggestions based on her own experience with the machine. To her surprise, he listened without dismissing her input, a refreshing change from most men she'd encountered. "You know your way around machinery," Tanner observed as they finished the repairs. "Most women I've met would faint at the mere suggestion of handling tools." Penny smiled wryly. "I'm not most women, Mr. Young Tanner," she corrected herself. "Necessity is a powerful teacher. After my father died, it was learn or lose everything." Tanner wiped his hands on a rag, studying her with newfound respect. "And you chose to learn." "I did." She tested the repaired belt with her good hand, satisfied with the tension. "Though I must admit, having help today has been nice." The word seemed inadequate, but Tanner understood. "Everyone needs help sometimes, Penny. even the strongest among us. As the sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Tanner gathered his tools. I should get back. My foreman will be wondering where I've disappeared to. Penny felt an unexpected disappointment at his imminent departure. Of course, I've kept you far too long already. Not at all. He hesitated, then asked, will you be all right on your own tonight? That arm needs rest. I'll be fine, she assured him, though the prospect of milking the cow and feeding the livestock with one good arm was daunting. I've managed worse. Tanner seemed unconvinced, but nodded. I'll stop by tomorrow to check on the thresher, make sure our repairs are holding. That's not necessary. I insist, he interrupted gently. Besides, I'd feel better knowing you hadn't decided to tackle any more machinery single-handedly while injured. There was humor in his voice, and Penny found herself smiling despite her usual resistance to being coddled. Very well, but I warn you I'll be back at work by sunrise. I wouldn't expect anything less, he replied, mounting his horse with fluid grace. Until tomorrow, then. Penny watched him ride away, the dying sunlight glinting off his hair. She couldn't remember the last time anyone had shown such genuine concern for her welfare without an ulterior motive. Most men who offered help were really offering marriage or something less honorable, assuming a woman alone couldn't possibly manage without a man's guidance. But Tanner Young seemed different. He'd helped because help was needed, not because he thought her incapable. And tomorrow he would return not out of obligation, but because he wanted to ensure she was safe. The thought brought an unexpected warmth to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the summer heat. True to her word, Penny was up before dawn the next day, feeding chickens and collecting eggs with her good arm. The morning chores took twice as long as usual, and by the time she finished milking the cow, an awkward, painful process. With her injured arm, she was sweating and frustrated. The thresher loomed in the field, a reminder of both yesterday's near disaster and the work still waiting to be done. Penny surveyed her wheat field with a critical eye. If she didn't finish the harvest within the next week, she risked losing a significant portion to weather or pests. But after yesterday's experience, she was reluctant to operate the machine alone. The sound of approaching hooves interrupted her deliberation. Tanner rode into the yard, but he wasn't alone. Behind him, 2 men followed on horseback, and behind them came a wagon driven by a third. Penny watched, puzzled, as they approached. "Good morning," Tanner called, dismounting with an easy smile. "I hope you don't mind the company I've brought." "Good morning," she replied cautiously. "That depends on the reason for the company." Tanner gestured to the men. "This is Pablo, Miguel, and Joseph, some of my best hands from the ranch. I thought you might appreciate some help with the harvest." Penny stared at him, momentarily speechless. Help with the harvest would mean finishing in days rather than weeks, saving her grain and possibly her farm. But her pride balked at accepting charity. "That's very kind," she began, "but I can't afford to hire extra hands right now." Tanner's expression remained open. "Consider it a neighborly exchange. My men will help with your harvest, and in return, you can sell me a portion of the grain for my horses at a fair price. I need good feed, and buying locally saves me the trouble of hauling it from town." Penny narrowed her eyes, suspecting he was creating a convenient excuse to help her without wounding her pride. "A business arrangement?" "Exactly," he confirmed, his blue eyes twinkling with something that told her he knew she'd seen through his pretense, but hoped she'd accept anyway. After a moment's consideration, Penny nodded. "All right, Mr. Young. I accept your business proposition." She extended her hand, and Tanner shook it firmly, his calloused palm warm against hers. "Excellent," he said. "Now, shall we get that thresher running properly?" The day unfolded in a blur of activity. Tanner's men were experienced and efficient, cutting wheat and feeding it into the thresher, while Penny and Tanner supervised the operation. By midday, they had harvested more than Penny could have managed in 3 days on her own. During a brief break for water, Penny found herself standing beside Tanner in the shade of the cottonwood tree. "Your men work well together," she observed, watching as Pablo and Miguel joked while adjusting the thresher's settings. They're good men, Tanner agreed. Loyal and hard-working. I'm fortunate to have them. How long have you been at the Wilson place? Penny asked, realizing she knew almost nothing about her new neighbor beyond his skill with machinery. Just over a month. I purchased it from Tom Wilson's widow after he passed. She wanted to return to St. Louis to live with her daughter. He took a long drink from his canteen. I spent 10 years driving cattle from Texas to Kansas, saving every penny. This ranch is the realization of a long-held dream. It's a good piece of land, Penny acknowledged. The water rights alone make it valuable in these parts. Tanner nodded, his expression thoughtful. Speaking of which, I noticed your irrigation system could use some work. The South Channel is nearly blocked with silt. Penny sighed. Added to the list, between the thresher repairs, the leaking roof, and the fence that needs mending, I'm not likely to get to irrigation before winter. I could help with that, Tanner offered casually. I'm good with water management. We could clear it this evening after the day cools. Penny studied him, trying to understand his motivation. Why are you doing all this, Tanner? You barely know me. He met her gaze directly. Because when I arrived here, I was a stranger, and several neighbors helped me get settled, fixed my well, showed me the property lines, warned me about flash flood areas. That's how communities survive out here. We help each other. He paused. Besides, I like you, Penny O'Malley. You've got grit. The simple compliment warmed her more than it should have. Well, I suppose I like you too, Tanner Young. For a cowboy, you're surprisingly useful around a wheat farm. His laugh rang out, genuine and uninhibited, drawing curious glances from his men. High praise indeed from a wheat farmer. I'll take it. The rest of the day passed in productive harmony. By sunset, they had harvested nearly half the field, and Tanner's men had loaded a wagon with grain bound for his ranch. As they prepared to leave, Tanner lingered behind. I'll come by tomorrow to help with that irrigation channel, he reminded her, and bring the men back the day after to finish the harvest, if that suits you. Penny nodded, suddenly aware that she'd enjoyed the day far more than expected, and the Tanner's company had been a significant reason why. That would be fine, she replied, trying to maintain a businesslike tone despite the flutter in her chest when he smiled. Until tomorrow, then. He touched the brim of his hat in a respectful gesture before mounting his horse and riding away. Penny watched until he disappeared from view, then turned back to her farmhouse. For the first time in months, the solitude felt less like independence and more like loneliness. Over the next 2 weeks, Tanner became a regular presence at the O'Malley farm. True to his word, he helped clear the irrigation channels, and his men returned to complete the wheat harvest in record time. But even after the work was finished, Tanner continued to find reasons to visit, bringing extra fencing materials left over from his own repairs, offering to help mend her leaking roof, or simply stopping by with fresh meat from a successful hunt. Each visit deepened their connection. Penny found herself looking forward to the sound of hoofbeats in the yard, to Tanner's easy smile and thoughtful conversations. Unlike other men who saw only her gender, Tanner saw her as a person of value, intelligent, capable, and worth listening to. One evening in late August, as they sat on her porch after a day spent repairing fence lines, Penny finally asked the question that had been on her mind. Don't you have a ranch to run, Tanner Young? You seem to spend an awful lot of time helping me with my problems. Tanner leaned back in his chair, stretching his long legs out before him. I have an excellent foreman who handles things when I'm not there. Besides, I'm the boss. I decide where my time is best spent. And you think it's best spent here? Helping a stubborn woman who refuses to admit she needs help? His expression softened. I think it's best spent with someone whose company I enjoy. The helping is just a bonus. The simple admission hung in the air between them, charged with meaning neither was quite ready to articulate. Penny looked away, her cheeks warming. Well, I suppose I enjoy your company too. Even if you do have deplorable opinions about the best way to predict rainfall. Tanner laughed, the tension of the moment broken. Cloud patterns are more reliable than your aching joints, Miss O'Malley, and I stand by that assessment. Their easy banter continued as twilight deepened into night, neither in a hurry to end the evening. When Tanner finally rose to leave, he hesitated at the top of the porch steps. "There's a harvest dance in Stillwater next Saturday," he said, his usual confidence suddenly replaced by a hint of uncertainty. "I was wondering if you might consider attending with me." Penny's heart skipped. A public outing together would signal to the community that they were, what exactly? Courting? The thought both thrilled and terrified her. "I haven't been to town in months," she hedged. "I'm not sure I have anything appropriate to wear." "You'd look beautiful in a feed sack," Tanner replied with such sincerity that Penny couldn't help but laugh. "Flatterer," she accused without heat. "But I'm serious. The ladies in town will be wearing their finest, and all I have are work dresses." Tanner considered this, then suggested, "Why not visit Emma Wilson in town? She was a seamstress before she married Tom. She might be able to help on short notice." Penny wavered, torn between wanting to accept and fearing the implications. Going to the dance with Tanner would mean acknowledging that their relationship had evolved beyond mere neighbors helping each other. "I'll think about it," she promised, not yet ready to commit. Tanner nodded, accepting her hesitation without pressing further. "That's all I ask. Good night." "Penny?" "Good night, Tanner." After he left, Penny remained on the porch, gazing at the stars and contemplating how quickly her life had changed. Just over 2 weeks ago, she'd nearly lost her arm and possibly her life to the threshing machine. Instead, she'd gained a friend, and perhaps something more. The next morning, Penny made a decision. She hitched her horse to the small buggy and drove into Stillwater, a journey she rarely undertook unless absolutely necessary. The town was bustling with activity when she arrived, farmers and ranchers conducting business while their wives shopped or gossiped in small groups. Penny made her way to Emma Wilson's small house on the edge of town, hoping the former seamstress would be home. Emma, a plump, cheerful woman in her 50s, greeted Penny with surprise and delight. "Penny O'Malley. Goodness, it's been ages since I've seen you in town. Come in, come in." She ushered Penny inside, chattering happily about local news and events. When Penny explained her purpose, Emma's eyes lit up with excitement. "A dress for the harvest dance? Of course I can help. And with Tanner Young, no less. He's caused quite a stir among the unmarried ladies in town, you know. Handsome, successful, and seemingly uninterested in any of them until now, it seems." Penny blushed. "We're just neighbors, Emma." Emma's knowing smile suggested she didn't believe that for a second. "Neighbors, is it? Well, let's make sure this neighbor appreciates what he sees on Saturday night." She bustled around the room, pulling out fabric samples and taking Penny's measurements. "I have a dress I was making for Judith Parker, but she's changed her mind about the color. With a few alterations, it would fit you perfectly. The deep green would complement your coloring beautifully." By the time Penny left Emma's house, arrangements had been made for a final fitting on Friday, and Penny had endured a good-natured interrogation about her relationship with Tanner that left her both embarrassed and strangely pleased. As she drove back to her farm, Penny allowed herself to feel a flicker of excitement. It had been so long since she'd done anything purely for pleasure, without the weight of responsibility pressing down on her. One evening of music and dancing, perhaps it was exactly what she needed. When Saturday evening arrived, Penny stood before the small mirror in her bedroom, hardly recognizing herself. The dress Emma had altered was indeed a deep forest green, with delicate lace trim and a more fashionable cut than anything Penny had owned before. Emma had insisted on styling her hair as well, arranging the auburn waves in a softer, more flattering manner than Penny's usual practical bun. "It's just a dance," Penny told her reflection, trying to calm her nerves, nothing more. But when she heard hoofbeats in the yard and went to the door to find Tanner waiting on a freshly groomed horse, wearing a clean black suit with a crisp white shirt, she knew it was far more than just a dance. Tanner dismounted slowly, his eyes never leaving her as she stepped onto the porch. For a moment, he seemed at a loss for words. "Penny," he finally managed, "you look absolutely stunning." She felt her cheeks warm. "Thank you. You clean up rather well yourself, Mr. Young." He grinned, some of his usual confidence returning. "I try my best when the occasion warrants it." He offered his arm. "Shall we?" The ride to Stillwater was filled with easy conversation, yet Penny was acutely aware of Tanner beside her, of the occasional brush of his arm against hers, of the admiring glances he cast her way when he thought she wasn't looking. The town hall had been transformed for the harvest dance. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting a warm glow over the wooden floor. A small band played lively tunes in the corner, and tables laden with food and drink lined one wall. Farmers, ranchers, townspeople, and their families filled the space, celebrating the successful completion of another harvest season. Their entrance caused a stir. Penny hadn't attended a social function since her father's death, and her appearance with Tanner, the eligible newcomer who had purchased the Wilson Ranch, generated immediate interest and speculation. "Everyone's staring," Penny murmured as Tanner guided her through the crowd. "Let them," he replied with a reassuring smile. "They're just admiring the most beautiful woman in the room." Before she could respond to his flattery, they were approached by Sheriff Morgan, a longtime friend of Penny's father. "Penny O'Malley, as I live and breathe," the sheriff greeted her warmly. "It's good to see you in town again. Your father would be proud of how you've kept that farm running." "Thank you, Sheriff," Penny replied, touched by the mention of her father. The sheriff turned to Tanner, extending his hand. "And Mr. Young, good to see you participating in community affairs. How's the ranch coming along?" As Tanner engaged in conversation with the sheriff, Penny was drawn away by Emma Wilson, who wanted to introduce her to some friends. For the next hour, Penny circulated through the crowd, reconnecting with neighbors she hadn't seen in months, and fielding not-so-subtle inquiries about her relationship with Tanner. Throughout it all, she was constantly aware of his presence in the room, his deep laugh carrying over the music, his tall figure moving among the other men, his eyes finding hers across the space with a warmth that made her heart flutter. When the band began playing a waltz, Tanner appeared at her side, hand extended in invitation. "May I have this dance, Miss O'Malley?" Penny hesitated only briefly before placing her hand in his. "You may, Mr. Young." He led her onto the dance floor, one hand resting lightly at her waist while the other held hers. As they began to move in time with the music, Penny was surprised by how naturally they fell into rhythm together. "I didn't know you could dance," she admitted, following his lead with growing confidence. "There's a lot you don't know about me yet," Tanner replied, his voice low. "I'm hoping you'll give me the chance to change that." The intimacy of his words, coupled with the warmth of his hand at her waist and the intensity of his gaze, sent a shiver of anticipation through Penny. For so long, she had focused solely on survival, on keeping the farm, on proving she could manage alone. She had convinced herself that independence meant isolation, that needing someone else was a weakness she couldn't afford. But as Tanner guided her around the dance floor with gentle confidence, Penny began to wonder if perhaps she had been wrong. Perhaps strength could be found in connection as well as self-reliance. "What are you thinking?" Tanner asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. Penny smiled, deciding on honesty. "That I'm glad I came tonight, with you." His answering smile could have lit the entire hall. "So am I, Penny. So am I." They danced every dance that followed, lost in their own world despite the curious gazes and whispered conversations around them. When they finally stepped outside for some air, the night was clear and cool, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. Tanner led Penny to a bench beneath an old oak tree, its branches casting dappled shadows in the moonlight. For a moment, they sat in comfortable silence, the music from the hall a distant backdrop to the night sounds around them. "Thank you for asking me to come tonight," Penny said at last. "I'd forgotten how pleasant it could be to simply enjoy life occasionally." Tanner turned to face her, his expression serious. "Penny, there's something I need to tell you." Her heart skipped, suddenly apprehensive. "Yes?" "When I first came to Stillwater, I had one goal, to build my ranch into something successful, something that would last. I wasn't looking for anything else," He took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. And then I heard a scream across a field and found a remarkable woman fighting a threshing machine, and everything changed. Penny's breath caught as Tanner continued, his voice low and sincere. These past weeks, getting to know you, seeing your strength and determination, your intelligence and kindness, I've come to care for you, Penny, more than I thought possible in such a short time. Tanner, Please, let me finish, he requested gently. I know you value your independence. I know you've worked incredibly hard to maintain the farm on your own, to prove you don't need anyone. And I admire that about you. Your self-reliance is part of what makes you so extraordinary. But I'd like the chance to be more than just your helpful neighbor. He lifted her hand and pressed a soft kiss to her knuckles. I'm not asking you to give up your independence or your farm. I'm asking if you might consider allowing me to court you properly. To see if what I feel, what I hope you feel too, might grow into something enduring. Penny's heart thundered in her chest. Part of her wanted to pull away, to retreat to the safety of her solitary existence where her heart was protected from potential pain. But a larger part, a part that had been awakening slowly since the day Tanner had saved her from the thresher, yearned to take the risk he was offering. I'm afraid, she admitted quietly. Not of you, but of this. I've built my life around not needing anyone, around proving I can manage alone. I'm not sure I know how to be any other way. Tanner's expression was understanding. Being strong doesn't mean being alone, Penny. It takes its own kind of courage to let someone in. She studied his face in the moonlight, the sincerity in his blue eyes, the gentle curve of his lips, the quiet patience in his expression. This was a man who had seen her at her most vulnerable and most capable, who had offered help without diminishing her, who had recognized her strength rather than being threatened by it. Yes, she said finally. Yes, Tanner repeated, a hopeful note in his voice. Penny nodded, a smile spreading across her face. Yes, I'd like you to court me, Tanner Young. Though I warn you, I'm likely to remain stubborn and independent. Joy transformed his features as he laughed. I wouldn't want you any other way, Penny O'Malley. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, Tanner leaned forward. When his lips met hers, the kiss was gentle, yet filled with promise, a beginning rather than an ending. As autumn gave way to winter, Tanner's courtship of Penny became the talk of Stillwater. He called on her regularly, bringing small gifts that showed his understanding of her practical nature, a new tool she had mentioned needing, books that fed her curious mind, a puppy from his shepherd's latest litter to help with the farm's predator problems. For Christmas, he surprised her by organizing a group of townspeople to help repaint her farmhouse and make essential repairs she had been postponing. When Penny protested that she couldn't accept such generosity, Emma Wilson had laughed and said, It's not charity, dear. It's community, something you've been missing out on by being so determined to do everything alone. The winter months brought them closer as they shared long evenings by the fire, discussing books, debating farming techniques, and gradually revealing the stories that had shaped them. Tanner spoke of his difficult childhood with an alcoholic father, of the mentor who had taught him about cattle and given him his first real job, of his dreams for the future. Penny shared memories of her mother who had died when she was young, of her father's progressive belief that women deserved education, of her determination to honor his legacy by keeping the farm thriving. As the frozen ground began to thaw and the first signs of spring appeared, Tanner and Penny found themselves facing decisions about the future. Their feelings for each other had deepened into something neither could deny, but practical considerations remained. They had separate properties, separate businesses, separate lives that somehow needed to be woven together. We could sell one of the properties, Tanner suggested one evening as they sat on Penny's porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues. Penny shook her head. This land has been in my family for 3 generations. I can't sell it, and your ranch is your dream. I'd never ask you to give that up. Tanner took her hand, his thumb tracing the calluses that spoke of her hard work. What if we didn't have to choose? The properties aren't that far apart. We could maintain both, diversify with both cattle and crops. It would make economic sense. And where would we live? Penny asked, practical as always. Together, Tanner replied simply. Wherever you prefer. Your farm, my ranch, or somewhere in between. He turned to face her fully, his expression earnest. I don't care where we live, Penny. I just want to build a life with you. The sincerity in his voice touched her deeply. Over the months of their courtship, Penny had come to understand that Tanner didn't want to change her or control her. He wanted to partner with her, to face life's challenges and joys side by side. Are you proposing, Tanner Young? She asked, her heart racing. In answer, Tanner slid from the porch swing to one knee before her. From his pocket, he withdrew a small wooden box, hand-carved with delicate patterns. I had this made in town, he explained, opening it to reveal a simple but elegant gold ring, set with a single emerald that caught the dying sunlight. I told the jeweler I wanted something as beautiful and unique as the woman who would wear it. Penny's breath caught as Tanner continued, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. Penny O'Malley, from the moment you slipped in the threshing belts at noon, and I told you to kill the gear and take my hand, my life changed course. I came to Stillwater looking for land to build a ranch. Instead, I found a woman who showed me what true strength looks like, not the absence of fear, but the courage to face it and persevere. You've taught me that independence and love aren't mutually exclusive, that the strongest partnerships are those where both people can stand on their own but choose to stand together. He held up the ring, his blue eyes never leaving hers. I love you, Penny. Will you marry me? Will you build a life with me where we face whatever comes, threshers, cattle drives, droughts, or prosperity as partners, equals in all things? Tears blurred Penny's vision as she looked at the man kneeling before her, this cowboy who had saved more than just her arm that day by the thresher. He had helped her find a balance between independence and connection, had shown her that accepting help didn't diminish her strength but enhanced it. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, Tanner, I'll marry you. Joy blazed across his face as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to gather her in his arms. Their kiss was a promise, a celebration, a beginning. They were married in May, when the wildflowers carpeted the prairie in a riot of color. The ceremony took place beneath the cottonwood tree, where Tanner had first tended to Penny's injured arm, a fitting symbol of how their relationship had begun, with one person helping another in a moment of need, and grown into something deep and enduring. All of Stillwater turned out for the occasion. Sheriff Morgan officiated, Emma Wilson wept happily from the front row, and Tanner's ranch hands stood proudly as witnesses. The couple exchanged vows they had written themselves, promises that honored both their individual strengths and their commitment to supporting each other. As Penny had insisted, they maintained both properties. They lived primarily at the O'Malley farm, which sat at a convenient midpoint between the wheat fields and the grazing lands. Tanner's foreman continued to manage the day-to-day operations at the ranch, while Penny and Tanner worked together on long-term planning for both businesses. Their first year of marriage brought challenges, as all marriages face. There were arguments about the best allocation of resources, adjustments to sharing decision-making after years of independence, and the inevitable tensions that arise when two strong-willed people forge a life together. But there was also deep joy in the partnership they built in waking beside each other each morning, in sharing both burdens and triumphs, in knowing that whatever came, they would face it together. In the spring of their second year of marriage, as they prepared for planting season, Penny discovered she was expecting their first child. The news filled them both with excitement and trepidation. How will we manage everything with a baby? Penny wondered one evening, her hand resting on the slight curve of her belly as they sat together on the porch that had become their favorite spot for important conversations. Tanner covered her hand with his own. The same way we've managed everything else together, one day at a time. And perhaps it's time to consider hiring more permanent help for both properties. Penny nodded, acknowledging the wisdom in his suggestion. "You're right. We can't do everything ourselves anymore, not with a child coming." Tanner smiled, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Look at you, admitting we need help. The Penny I met 2 years ago would never have conceded that point so easily." She laughed, leaning into his embrace. "The Penny you met 2 years ago nearly lost her arm to a threshing machine because she was too stubborn to stop and do things properly. I'd like to think I've gained some wisdom since then." "We both have," Tanner agreed, "though I'll always be grateful for that particular stubbornness of yours. If you hadn't been trying to fix that thresher alone, we might never have met." "True," Penny mused. "It seems I owe my happiness to a mechanical failure and my own impatience. And I owe mine to being in the right place at the right time to hear you scream." Tanner's arm tightened around her shoulders. "Sometimes I still have nightmares about what might have happened if I'd been riding elsewhere that day." Penny turned to face him, her hand gently cupping his cheek. "But you weren't. You were exactly where you needed to be, when I needed you most, just as you've been ever since." Their daughter Clara was born in the winter, a healthy, strong, lunged baby with her mother's auburn hair and her father's blue eyes. She grew into a curious, adventurous child who followed her parents everywhere, asking endless questions about the farm and ranch operations. By the time Clara was 5, she had a younger brother, James, who was equally fascinated by the family businesses. Tanner and Penny raised their children as they managed their properties with a blend of practical education, respect for hard work, and deep love. 10 years after that fateful day by the thresher, Penny stood in the same wheat field, watching as Tanner demonstrated to 9-year-old Clara the proper way to adjust a belt on the newer, safer threshing machine they had purchased. "Always turn off the power first," Tanner instructed seriously. "No matter how small the adjustment, no matter how much of a hurry you're in." "Because that's how Mama almost lost her arm," Clara recited, having heard the story many times, "and how you two met." "That's right," Penny confirmed, stepping forward to join them. "It was a hard lesson to learn, but an important one." "And a lucky one for me," Tanner added, straightening up to wrap an arm around Penny's waist. "Best day of my life, finding your mother fighting with this contraption." "Even though it was dangerous?" Clara asked, wide-eyed. Penny exchanged a look with Tanner, the years of shared history, challenges, and joy passing between them in an instant. "Sometimes," Penny told her daughter, "the most dangerous moments lead to the greatest blessings if you're fortunate enough to have someone extend a helping hand when you need it most." Tanner's fingers tightened around hers, a silent affirmation of the truth in her words. What had begun with a slip of a belt at noon, a moment of terror and potential tragedy, had transformed into a life neither of them could have imagined on their own. A life built on mutual respect, partnership, and a love that had only deepened with each passing year. As they walked back to the farmhouse together, Clara running ahead to tell her brother about the workings of the thresher, Penny leaned into Tanner's embrace, grateful beyond words for the day he had appeared like an answer to an unspoken prayer, calling out those words that had changed everything. "Kill the gear. Take my hand now." She had taken his hand that day, and in doing so, had found not just safety, but a future brighter than she could have dreamed one, where independence and love existed in perfect balance, where strength came from standing together, and where a near tragedy had become the foundation for a lifetime of happiness.